I want to say good afternoon to everyone, and this is a moment really where I want to open with a sense of gratitude. I want to thank my colleagues for their incredible work and leadership, and especially recognize the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Chuck Grassley. I want to thank Senator Dick Durbin, who has been a hero of mine on issues of criminal justice reform, as well as Mike Lee, who's been a champion, all of their staffs, everyone who's been involved in the tireless work and efforts that have been going on in what is a bill that is pending on the floor now, the First Step Act. I also want to recognize the incredible people, many of them advocates, many of them citizens, many of them activists, so many of the groups that have been pushing, challenging, demanding that we have criminal justice reform in this country. A lot of these groups have been organized and working for years and years before I came to the Senate, to try to bring forth criminal justice reform. They've offered insight, they've brought wisdom, they've helped to shape this legislation. Their advocacy has made this a better bill. It's because of the work and the diversity of voices that have been involved in this process that we stand poised today to pass this bill, to begin to deliver some reform to our savagely broken criminal justice system. I'm proud of this coalition. I'm proud that the coalition has people all across the political spectrum. I'm proud that the coalition has people from diverse backgrounds. This is how change has been made in this country for generations. But I want to return to this fact that we are poised to do this bill because of the deeply savage and broken criminal justice system that we have. Since 1980 alone, our federal prison population has exploded by 800%, an 800% increase in our prison population. And this is because of failed policies by this body that created harsh sentences, harsh mandatory minimum penalties. 3 strikes, you're out. The kind of bills that have helped this population of prisoners to explode to be the largest in terms of percentage on the planet Earth. America is now the preeminent incarceration nation. We are the incarcerating capital of the planet Earth. And even though we only have 5% of the world's population, 1 in 4 of the incarcerated people on the planet Earth are here in the United States of America. 1 in 3 of all the incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in the United States of America. And today, close to 1/3 of all adults in the United States has a criminal record. We have criminalized the United States population. About 1/3 of Americans have a criminal record. But after decades of failed federal policies, and after decades of growing in the wrong direction, we now have an opportunity to reverse course in a significant way. Our criminal justice system, as it stands right now, is an affront to who we say we are as a nation. We actually swear an oath to the flag that we are a nation of liberty and justice for all, but our criminal justice system violates those values. I believe you can tell a lot about a nation, not by its buildings, not by its structures or its wealth, but you can tell a lot about the true character of a nation by looking at its prisons and seeing who they incarcerate. You can go to countries with authoritarian regimes and see how they imprison their political opposition. You can go to some countries and see that they actually incarcerate members of the media. We don't do that in the United States, but we in this country, if you go into our prisons and our jails, you see overwhelmingly we incarcerate those who are marginalized in our society, those who are most vulnerable in our society. Overwhelmingly, in the United States of America, our prisons and jails are full of those Americans who are already hurting and struggling and often need more of help than a system that hurts them. Our prisons and jails have become warehouses for people that are struggling with trauma, struggling with disease, struggling with illness. Right now, our prisons and jails are filled overwhelmingly with people with mental illness, overwhelmingly with Americans struggling with addiction, overwhelmingly with Americans who are survivors of sexual assault, and also overwhelmingly, it's full of Americans who are low income, full of poor folks, and people who are disproportionately people of color. This is a system in our country that feeds upon certain communities and not others. The war on drugs, which has fueled so much of the explosion of our prison population, has really been a war on certain people and certain communities and not on others. I'm the only United States senator that lives in a majority black and brown community. It is low income, but I'll tell you right now, my community does not mistake wealth with worth. I live in an inner city community, and when I go home at the end of most weeks, I draw strength from my community. I see the evidence of the incredible growth that's occurred when good people in a city pull together, work together, and can accomplish things that other people who are disrespecting, disregarding, or just plain dissing them don't think is possible. I'm proud of my community. But despite all the work that's been done in the city of Newark, I still live in a community that is both over-criminalized and underprotected because of federal policies, because of policies in this body, policies that mistake the severity of a punishment with the actual security of a people. We know there is no deeper proclivity to commit crimes among people of color, but there is a much deeper bias in the way that our drug laws have been and are being applied, which disproportionately target people of color and low-income communities. We have a system that over a century, we in a nation have overcome slavery, decades of Jim Crow. But as one author, Michelle Alexander, calls our criminal justice system, she calls it the new Jim Crow because of its disproportionate impact on people of color. We now have a criminal justice system where there are more African American men under criminal supervision than there were enslaved in 1850. This is a punishing reality that I've seen with my own eyes, where people in certain privileged communities don't face the kind of scrutiny, the kind of arrests that you do in other communities in our country. And the truth is about human nature, about human beings, is that all of us make mistakes. That's an inevitable part of life. But the way our country's drug laws are designed and applied, a kid in a more privileged community or on a college campus gets a chance to stumble, to learn a lesson, wide margins for error. But a kid living in a community that's low income or a community that's black and brown, they get trapped by a system that disproportionately impacts their lives than it does others. It's Brian Stevenson that said, "We live in a nation that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent." We see in the United States of America, Americans getting trapped in a system that we know the data is clear. There is no difference between blacks and whites for using drugs or selling drugs in the United States of America. No difference. But if you are black, you are almost 4 times more likely to get arrested for selling drugs and almost 3 times more likely to be arrested for possession of drugs. This is one of the things that have led to such a dramatic racial disparity in incarceration in the United States of America. People right now in our country sitting in prisons for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing, but encountered a different type of justice system. The scales of justice in America are not balanced. This is a system that hurts people, and it hurts people that are often already struggling, often already hurt. What do we do in this country with a nonviolent drug offense? What we do to people in this country with a nonviolent drug offense is like getting a life sentence. For the rest of your life, even after you've come out of a prison sentence, or even if you got no time served at all, once you are convicted for a nonviolent drug offense, again, like people in this body and in the White House have done before, if you've been convicted for that crime, potentially in this body, I'm making no accusations, but once you've been convicted of a crime for the rest of your life, if you're one of those folks who's been convicted of a nonviolent drug offense, you have to check a box. that says you're going to have a difficulty being hired, that you're going to have difficulty getting housing, you can't get many business licenses, you can't get food stamps, you can't get a loan from the bank. In fact, the American Bar Association points to 40,000 collateral consequences that come with a criminal conviction in this country. 40,000 collateral consequences that follow you for life for a criminal conviction. And so now we're debating a funding bill that's dominating the news. But we already are throwing an exorbitant amount of taxpayer money, dollars, into the black hole of mass incarceration, not making us safer, not making us stronger, in fact, making us more vulnerable as a community. We have been using government resources not to offer more support for law enforcement, not to offer more opportunities for Americans to get mental health care, not to help more folks get access to drug treatment, not to rehabilitate people, but we have been spending more and more money actually hurting more Americans, putting them into a system that actually harms them often more than helps them with their addiction, with their mental health issue, with their trauma. We are using our resources to compound hurt and harm that people have already endured, to incarcerate more Americans than ever before in our history, and ultimately makes our neighborhoods and communities, ones like mine, less safe, not more. And despite the fact that our infrastructure in this country is crumbling, that our trains and roads and bridges are in desperate need of repair, we have been investing in a different type of infrastructure. Between 1990 and 2005, a new prison in this country has been opened every 10 days. Billions and billions of dollars for the constructions of prisons and jails to warehouse human potential, folks that often need help, need counseling, need mental health care, need rehabilitation. We've been taking the far more expensive way and warehousing human beings in our prisons and jails instead of helping them. And we call this system a justice system. It is not meant to be a system of retribution. It's meant to be a justice system. It's not meant to be a system of punishment. Punishment only. It's supposed to be meant to be a justice system. We are Americans. We have ideals of restoration, of rehabilitation. Ultimately, in the United States of America, we all believe that this is a nation where redemption is possible. One of our Senate colleagues, a former colleague who stood in the same well, he got into a lot of trouble in his youth, was convicted of multiple crimes. Crimes like arson, crimes like assault. He attacked a police officer. He actually became one of the most serious, outspoken advocates for reforming this broken system. It was Senator Alan Simpson. And this is what he once wrote. He said, "I was lucky that the bullets I stole from a hardware store as a teenager and fired from my .22 caliber rifle never struck anybody. I was fortunate that the fires I set never hurt anyone. I heard my wake-up call and I listened." He went on to say that I went on to have many opportunities to serve my country and my community. When a young person is sent up the river, we need to remember that all rivers can change course. He went from an arsonist. He went from a person that attacked police officers. He went from a person that was admittedly guilty of crimes to a United States senator, because we are a nation that believes in redemption. The fact of the matter is that when most people go to prison, 95% of those folks right now in state prisons will come back to our communities. And the question is, will they come out further harmed by the system or better able to start again? Better able to avoid more criminality, or will they be people that actually help to make us safer and stronger, to be elevated towards that ideal of full citizenship? Those of us in this body who proclaim Christian faith, we know the story of the prodigal child, that child that did wrong, but yet when they came back, their father embraced them. It was that story held in the Christian community as an ideal. But what do we do in America? Is it the story of the prodigal child? It is not. Because this is a system that right now that inflicts harm on those incarcerated rather than trying to rehabilitate them. This is a system that still subjects young people to what other countries and human rights activists in this nation call torture, juvenile solitary confinement. This is a system that in some places still denies women access to basic sanitary products. This is a system that in some places still allows the shackling of pregnant women during birth. This is a system that burdens families, hurting them economically, fracturing entire communities like the one I live in. It is a system that inflicts poverty by concentrating its attacks on low-income neighborhoods. In fact, according to a study from Villanova University, the poverty rate in all of America would be 20% lower if we had incarceration rates in line with our industrial peers. This system as a whole is a cancer on the soul of our country, and it's hurting every single American. But today, we have an opportunity to do something about addressing the ills of this system. And that's why I'm proud that this is a bipartisan compromise bill with leadership, extraordinary leadership on both sides of the aisle saying, hey, there are things we need to begin to correct for this system. There's ways to make this system more fair. There's ways to make this system better reflect our collective values and ideals. Because of this collection work done over the last years, this bill includes critical sentencing reform that will reduce mandatory minimums and give judges discretion back, not legislators, but judges who sit and see all the totality of the facts. Thanks to the work of Senator Durbin, the racially based crack cocaine sentencing disparity has already been negotiated down from 100-1 to 18-1. It should be equal, it should be 1-1, but we've made progress. The problem was the change wasn't retroactively applied. And because of that, there are people sitting in jail right now for selling an amount of drugs equal to the size of a candy bar, who have watched people come in and leave jail for selling enough drugs to fill a suitcase. We never made this change retroactive. That's not justice. Making this fix in this bill alone will mean that thousands of Americans who have more than served their time will become eligible for release, and it addresses some of the racial disparities in our system because 90% of the people that will benefit from that are African American, 96% are Black and Latino. This bill includes a provision that I've worked on for the past 4 years that will effectively end the use of juvenile solitary confinement among young people under federal supervision. This bill takes an important step, but still incomplete step in reforming the way women are treated behind bars. This bill will ensure incarcerated women have access to free sanitary products and ban the shackling of pregnant incarcerated women. Last year, I introduced a bill that includes this reform among others, and I'm happy to see it part now of this legislation. Can we do more? Yes. This legislation is a product of compromise. This legislation is just one step in the right direction. But if we pass this legislation, it is a step in the right direction, and I hope momentum for greater, urgently needed reforms that are supported by conservatives in this country and progressives. Let's make no mistake. This legislation, which is one small step, will affect thousands and thousands of lives. Those are not just some people. When you affect the lives of some Americans on issues of justice, you affect the lives of all Americans, because we as a people cannot fall into that trap of separateness. The insidious idea that we think that there are some throwaway people whose dignity we can assault without assaulting our own. Dr. King said justice is indivisible, and he was right. We cannot separate a system of oppression in our country and think that it won't affect us all as a whole. It couldn't be further from the truth. You cannot deny justice, deny dignity to any American without it affecting us all. You cannot cheapen justice for some without it cheapening the justice of us all. As a man much greater than anyone in this body once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment. We cannot suffer the illusion of separation when we think this criminal justice system that is so punishing some is not hurting this country as a whole. Our criminal justice system as it stands right now is a gaping self-inflicted wound. This bill is a step towards healing. Mr. President, it's been perhaps one of the greatest honors of my life, easily one of the greatest honors as a senator, to work in a bipartisan coalition over the last 5 years to get to this point. I've had the opportunity to sit down with people in common cause, from Republicans on the far end of the conservative spectrum to individuals and organizations who on most issues I often disagree with. But we have found common ground because this system is an affront to our most fundamental common values on both sides of this aisle: values of freedom, values of liberty, values of equality, values of fairness and justice. We share those common values because we still live in a nation where the ties that bind us are stronger than the lines that divide us. This bill is a recognition of the fact that we are bound together as a people by the most precious ideals in humanity, the ideals that were put forth by our founders and that have been inspired to in every generation and have been worked on in every generation, making us a more perfect union. We know that our nation's history, bills and debates we've seen in this very body, we know our nation's history is scarred by many wretched injustices. Slavery and the denial of universal suffrage, Jim Crow and segregation. But like people, individuals who've done wrong in the past, like people, our nation has demonstrated the capacity to change. We as a nation have demonstrated the capacity to improve. Like people, we have demonstrated as a nation the capacity to redeem ourselves. None of us should ever be judged by the least of what we've done, but instead by our ability and our capacity to find redemption. Every generation has worked to make our ideals more true and real, making the dream more accessible to us all, and standing for each other. We have worked with each other. We have sacrificed with each other despite differences in race and differences in color, differences in religion and creed. Every single great gain in this country has been made by multi-ethnic, multiracial, broad-based coalitions, because we recognize the ideal that is above the president's desk, written in stone here, that ideal of e pluribus unum, out of the many, one. We know that that's not just a slogan, those aren't just words, it is a calling to the people of this country. I want to see more than the bill we have today, and I know we can do more than just this bill we have today, but this is a first step, it is a necessary step, for the sake of thousands of Americans whose lives will be directly affected. This is a step in the right direction. I hope that we all come together and make this first step momentum on the journey. We have work to do in this country. I'm proud to have been a part of what can be a historic step in the right direction. May our work continue. Mr. President, I yield the floor.